evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Hi, friends. How are you all doing? I know that I've missed you. I hope you've missed coming to this space, but I'm so grateful that you are tuning in today. So, welcome to Cultivate Your Mental Wealth. And in this space, we take you from a place of mental illness to a place of mental wellness, and from mental wellness to a place of abundance. And what I love about abundance is that you are able to give and live in the overflow. Abundance means more than enough because our wellness is not just tied to us, it is tied to our communities. So it's not just enough to be mentally well, you want to be mentally full and abundant. So let's go on that journey together. Let's figure it out. Let's talk about it. My name is Joyce Ozeh. I am a first-generation Nigerian American civil rights attorney here in Chicago. I am also a mental health advocate, and I am someone with lived experience. What do I mean by that? I have lived experience with major depression and generalized anxiety generally. I was diagnosed with that previously, and thank God I'm in a place of wellness. And I want everyone, especially my people, to experience the wellness that is possible. You do not have to be who you've always been. You don't have to go by the names you've always called yourself. So that's the space. And the last time we spoke was February 14th, Valentine's Day, Black History Month. It's always funny when I'm talking to my community about Black History Month because at the end of the day, we are Black every single month. So even though Black History Month is over, let's always find reasons to celebrate our culture, our origin, our people. Last time we talked, I asked y'all to send me little shout outs about where your family's from. And I recognize that that is easier done for some people than others. But we can celebrate our roots for however far back we can trace them. Even if we can't trace them any further back than where you currently are, celebrate that. Celebrate Black History Month every day because we're Black every day. Okay, so I want y'all to drop in the comments, where are you watching from? Where are you tuning in from? What are you looking forward to this new month, this new week? I'd love to hear that. And I also want y'all to know just what you can expect for this show. I know we were supposed to meet on Tuesday. That is still our regularly scheduled time. We had some programming conflicts, but you know what? Everything happens for a reason, and we're here now, and that's all that matters. So, overview. Today, we are talking about successful Black public figures who have experienced, who are currently experiencing mental illness, and how they get to places of mental health. We're also going to talk about an audience check-in. I love the part of the show. If my whole show can be just talking to y'all one-on-one, it would be my favorite thing. So please drop comments in the check-in. When we go through the figures, the public back figures, I want you to tell me who you were surprised by that identifies as having mental illness and any symptoms that you can relate to. So after we have that conversation and after the audience check-in, I'm going to let you know what you can look forward to on the next segment. And also I want to leave you with some practical pushes so that we're not just here talking in theory, but that we're also here learning how to practically go to places of mental wellness. Does that sound good? I hope so, because it's the only thing that's on the menu. So again, I welcome you to this space. And before we dive into the main segment, I like to go into some housekeeping, and I like to call it setting the room. Remember, when you are in this space with me, we are in it together and you are safe. You are seen, you are heard, and there is no judgment in this space. One of the biggest pushes for creating this show for me was to make sure that Black people had a space where we can discuss mental wealth and mental health in a way that is transparent, open, but most importantly, safe. This is our conversation. This is your space. Don't miss out. Join in. Okay, folks, let's talk. Today, I would like to cover 4 Black public figures again, who have experienced and openly expressed their experiences with mental illness and mental wellness. Now, I do want to let you all know that some of those experiences may be trigger for you. Some of the figures experienced abuse. So, if that is something that's in your past, I'm going to talk about some resources that you can connect with. But I also just want to flag that it's a potential trigger warning for you now. We're not going to go into details, but we are going to make mention of some experiences that could be traumatizing. But again, you are safe, you are in this space, and you deserve to be part of the conversation. So, the reason I wanted to talk about successful Black figures who are living with mental illness, who have overcome mental illness, is because we don't talk about it enough. And we're talking about mental health and mental wellness. Some of it feels just kind of like a theory or like a hot, trendy topic. But it is so important for one, us to share our stories, but also it's important to put faces to these issues that are very real for our people. Mental illness isn't a white person thing. Mental illness isn't a luxury. Most of the people that you know are going to experience some kind of mental illness or mental struggle at some point in their lives. And this is why it's important that we can talk about it, but also honor, recognize, and highlight public Black figures who are successful, who also talk about it. I believe that this breaks stigmas, it normalizes these topics, and it sets us free. We deserve mental freedom. So the first figure that I want to talk about is Miss Taraji P. Henson. She is one of my absolute favorites. Some of y'all may know her. I hope most of y'all know her because she is huge in Hollywood, one of the highest grossing actresses actually to date. So she is an American actress for those of you who are watching abroad. She had her breakthrough role on Baby Boy. She had an amazing role in Hustle and Flow. Y'all may know her as Cookie from Empire. She was also in Hidden Figures and so much more. Honestly, if I wrote down all her accolades, we would be here for longer than the allotted time. She's also a Golden Globe winner, a best-selling author, a mother, and she was in the Times 100 most influential people. And guess what? She recently, it was the start of the end of the pandemic of 2020, so the end of that first year, where she opened up about experiencing major depression. And what she actually talked about was how she witnessed a lot of trauma growing up, and she masked that and internalized her trauma as a child. How many of you can relate to that? A lot of us as children, especially Black children, have witnessed a lot of traumatic events that we then mask or internalize. And internalizing means that we just take all those things and all those feelings and we keep them inward. We don't express them, we keep them inward. We process them inwardly and we process them alone. Taraji actually witnessed her mother getting robbed 2 times. One of those times she talked about was at gunpoint. And she could tell that her mother was only staying calm because she knew that Taraji and her siblings were watching the traumatic event. And interestingly, Taraji took that as she had to be strong and brave as a Black woman. She had to be a fighter. And her mom would tease her and be like, "You're not afraid of going out into the world. You're not afraid of doing all these things." And she said, "No, I'm a fighter." So instead of processing the trauma that she witnessed, she turned it into, I can take on the world. I'm a strong, resilient Black woman. I'm a fighter. And none of those things are inherently bad. Black women are strong. We are resilient. We are fighters. We are capable. But when we make that our only identities, we don't leave room for vulnerability. We don't leave room for softness. We don't leave room for seeking help or for healing. I want you to also think about what are some of the narratives of strength and resilience that you've associated with yourself at the expense of other parts of you, like being afraid sometimes or needing help. We don't always have to be independent, but one of the responses to trauma is hypervigilance. And we see that a lot with Taraji P. Henson, right? What I mean by hypervigilance is hyper means over the top. So it's a defense mechanism where you feel like you have to fight extra hard or be extra defensive because the world is scary and terrible. And to protect your mental health, you have to be hyper vigilant about your defenses. The issue with operating in hypervigilance is that your body wasn't designed to sustain that. Your body produces chemicals in a hypervigilant state that can actually really exhaust you if you sustain hypervigilance consistently. And that's why Taraji actually wanted to seek out therapy and get help. Because after all the trauma she experienced, she talked about how it was important for her to speak her issues out loud. How many of us are able to do that? Taraji was actually having suicidal ideation. She bought a gun and was thinking of harming herself. But what she did was she got on the phone and she was like, I know this is a lot. It was one of her friends. And she's like, I know this is a lot, but I have to tell you something. I'm thinking of doing this to myself. And I just need to say it out loud. And how she got to a place of wellness and a place of even more success mentally. And that success has transferred in so many other ways, as you know. But how she got to a place of wellness was she spoke what she was experiencing out loud to a person that she trusted, and it was her friend. Taraji also sought therapy. She also started a show called Peace of Mind with Taraji, and you can actually find her series on Facebook Watch. There are 2 seasons, I believe. That's Peace of Mind with Taraji. And she just brings guests on her show. Most of them are Black, and she just talks about her experience, and they talk about it with her. She shares her story, and that has helped heal her. There is power in sharing our stories. We're going to talk about that more in a little bit, but I can't underscore enough how important that was for her in her journey. And another beautiful thing that she did that I love is she started the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation. Henson is her dad. And her dad actually was a Vietnam War veteran. And she started a mental health foundation in his honor. And at that foundation, she's able to help people connect with culturally competent therapists. That means a therapist that understands your culture, your background, what you're going through, so you don't have to explain it in the basics about what you experience as a Black person every day. Culturally competent therapists are so important. And that's what her platform seeks to connect people with. She also gives free services for mental illness if people are able to qualify. So I want to name that foundation again if you're interested. And it's the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation. She turned her trauma into triumph. And she didn't hide from what she was experiencing. Rather, she opened up about it, was transparent, shared her story, and made it her victory. And now that victory is the victory of other people. And that's what I'm talking about, living in abundance and living in the overflow. She's healing herself and she's healing her community. Isn't that so powerful? I love me some Taraji. She is just incredible to me. But there are so many other figures that we can talk about. And another person who I really, really, really respect, the more I've looked into him and heard him speak, is Tyler Perry. Again, I'm going to talk about him as if y'all don't know him, but I know most of you all know him. In the event that you don't, Tyler Perry is an American actor, filmmaker, and he's a playwright. He's also an entrepreneur. He has also, along with Taraji, been named as Times 100's most influential people. I believe it was as recently as 2021, actually. He's also a billionaire and the first Black person to own a major film studio. What y'all may not know, too, is that he thought he was going to be a minister. So he used to preach. And I actually was listening to one of his sermons at Pastor Joel Osteen's church. Now, I encourage you to look at that sermon because it is a fascinating insight into his journey and how he can experience mental illness, but still get to a place of mental health and a place of incredible abundance and success. I mean, he's a billionaire. But what he was saying is that when he was building this studio, he actually buried Bibles under the ground when you're driving through the gate. And that is to say, in order to come through the gates of that studio, you have to pass over the word of God. Powerful. In fact, he hasn't always lived in this place of abundance. Some of you may have heard his story, but he grew up in an extremely violent and abusive environment. He called his entire childhood a living hell. He had a very abusive father, a father that was physically abusive to him and physically abusive to his mother and verbally abusive. He also has opened up on a few occasions about the sexual abuse that he experienced. He was molested by multiple neighbors. Again, we're not going to go into those details, but if you are interested in his journey and his triumph, I encourage you to look into it more. Because of all of this, he had multiple suicide attempts. And what he said was, had any one of those attempts happened, I would have missed the best part of my life. I would have missed the best part of my life. Let that just sink in. I don't know what you're going through, what you're experiencing, what a loved one is experiencing. Maybe you're feeling deep hopelessness. Maybe you're feeling that this is the best it could ever be. But this is from someone who is wildly successful, saying that he is so grateful he was able to overcome because he's experiencing the best right now. And I encourage you that there's nothing unique about Tyler Perry that can't also be yours. I, from the depths of my heart, mean it when I say that your best is yet to come. And every season runs out of rain. You've survived 100% of your worst days, so you can honestly already call yourself a survivor. And I want these stories to encourage you and to let you know that better is still coming. What Tyler Perry also said is that he wouldn't know where he would be without his faith. So he used to get dragged to church with his mother, and he would just see her after everything she's been through, singing up there in the choir with a smile on her face. And he's like, I want to know the God that makes my mother smile like that. He also has shared information on the social media about the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And he encourages people to reach out and connect when they're feeling low. He also recharacterized his pain. What does that mean? His pain was no longer a tragic story, although it is, but he believed that his pain allowed him to buy into something that is greater. He believed that his pain wasn't his fault, and it also allowed him to build character that is sustaining him now. It is unfortunate whenever we have to go through deeply violent and traumatic things. Also know that your pain is never, ever wasted. That there is something that is being built in you that is not only for you, but for the people around you. Your pain will be recycled. You don't deserve it. It is not your fault. It is also not a waste. If it means hanging in there for 5 more minutes, hang in there for 5 more minutes. And then for 5 more minutes after that. That is one of the most common things that I've seen with all these public figures, is the encouragement just to hang in there. I want to also talk about Michelle Obama. Y'all know Michelle Obama. She is an American attorney and an author who served as our first lady, still my first lady. She actually went to Princeton undergrad, and she got her Juris Doctor, her law degree, from Harvard. She recently talked about how she suffered a low-grade depression during the height of the pandemic. As a lot of us know, especially Black people, there was like a racial reckoning during the COVID. So we didn't have the luxury of just going through COVID. There was a lot of racial unrest and police brutality, and that kind of pulled her into a depression. But despite all of this, she says that we need to talk more about mental health because everybody deals with trauma and anxiety and difficulties in different ways. Miss Obama encourages us to talk about it. Make this normal. Don't let it be a scary thing that you deal with on your own. In fact, she models that by talking about it. She released a book called The Light We Carry: Overcoming in Uncertain Times. She also actively embraces community and relationship building. That's something you can do. Reach out to people. Don't do this in isolation. This is what helped her get through, and this is what she advocates for. I also encourage you to look at her book, The Light We Carry, because it really gives you insight into how you are more than capable of being resilient as a Black person in this country and as a Black person who may be experiencing mental health issues. Now, we would be remiss if we were talking about public Black figures and mental illness and success if we did not mention the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This may be news to some of you, but it is something that people close to him have talked about, that he himself has talked about, and that is his experiences with major depression and suicide attempts, especially at an early age. For those of you who may not know, Dr. King was an American Baptist minister and an activist. He is one of the most prominent leaders in the civil rights movement from 1955 until his assassination in 1968. He was only 39 years old. However, in that very short period, he led marches for the right to vote, desegregation, labor rights, and other major civil rights issues. He even won the Nobel Peace Prize for combating racial inequity through nonviolent resistance. I encourage any of you who may not be as familiar or who think you're familiar, go and revisit his work. It will inspire and astound you. And he did all of this while battling depression. What was said about him and his battles with depression is that he wielded it like a sword. On the one hand, depression was very exhausting for Dr. King, but on the other hand, it gave him the gift of understanding. I want you all to see your experiences as a gift, because it is through that difficulty and that trauma that you are able to develop the lens of empathy, and you're able to see what people may need because you need it. If you need it, trust that other people need it. That's exactly what Dr. King did. He was able to see beyond his despair and see that this is what really matters. Freeing people, my community, enlightening them, empowering them, and educating them. And that clarity brought him out of mental illness because it gave him purpose. Dr. King focused on purpose, and that purpose lens brought him to a place of wellness. So I know that there have been a lot of commotion in the chat. I hope that you've been able to listen to the stories of these figures and be inspired. But now I want to go to some of our audience check-ins. I am so happy to have you with me in this space. Crystal from New York, thank you so much for being here. I love that you are a peer. Hi, friend Carolyn, it's so good to see you. I want to know where y'all are also calling from. Wanda, thank you so much for tuning in from California. I'm so happy to have all of you in that space. If you have any questions, or if there are people that you can relate to from the ones that I've mentioned, drop it in the chat. If I don't answer now, I will certainly circle back and answer at the end of the segment. So I want to talk about what's coming up next before we go into our practical pushes. You will be able to join this space again Tuesday, March 14th. And we are going to talk about the stigma of mental health in the Black community. I know we've mentioned stigma before, but in order to get past something, we have to understand how it began, why it's there. So where does the stigma of mental illness in the Black community even come from? And why are we still kind of nervous about mental illness? What is it all about? And how do we overcome the stigma in the Black community? I promise this is a segment that you are not going to want to miss, because we need to understand where we're coming from in order to understand where we're going, right? Okay, so this is a part of the show where we get into practical pushes for wellness, and I give you tips on how to get to a place of mental health. Stay tuned. Okay, so the last time we talked, we were talking about how it's important to connect last time. Connect with people, connect with friends, connection, connection, connection. Now, I want us to pivot to reflection. The only way for us to share our stories is if we are able to reflect on our stories. I was so deeply encouraged when I was reading through Taraji P. Henson's journey with depression, reading through Tyler Perry's experience with suicide attempts, and Michelle Obama's candidness when it talked about her isolation and depression. I especially love Dr. King's transparency when he talked about how he was deeply an empath, which I can relate to, and how that affected his mind and how he struggled with depression and suicidal ideation. As dark as those stories can be, I'm encouraged by them because they end in wellness and they end with light. And the only way that they were able to share those stories is because those prominent, successful figures were able to reflect. And my practical push for you is reflect, slow down and reflect. Now, you may not be where you want to be. You may not be in a place of wellness. You may be telling me, Joyce, I know you're talking about reflection and wellness, but nothing good has happened for me. I am still struggling with anxiety, with depression, with psychotic symptoms. I'm still struggling to regulate my medication. I'm still struggling to figure out a therapist that makes sense and that can understand where I'm coming from. I hear that. I really do. But one of the most powerful things about reflection is that you don't have to be where you want to be in order for that reflection to be valid. The importance of reflection is it allows us to slow down and not just be so hyper focused on where we want to be, but to look at how far we've come. You may not be where you want to be, but you most certainly are not where you were. It's okay if that journey isn't perfectly linear. It's okay if you're not going from point A to point B, but reflection allows you to stop and celebrate where you've come from. So, my practical push is, what is your story? Reflect on it. Even the broken parts. Remember that your pain is always recycled, and it is a part of what is building and developing you. Reflect on that too. There are people who need to hear your story, not the sugar-coated version, not the PG version, the raw, real version. Reflect on your story, write it down, celebrate those wins, and most importantly, share your story. There are people whose wellness is tied to you. And when you share your story, you're not only healing yourself, you're healing others. Don't be ashamed of where you're coming from and get excited for where you're going. That is my practical push for you. Thank you again so much, friends, for joining this space. I still look forward to talking with you on March 14th, same time, Tuesday. And until then, go and thrive. You deserve it.